We're super psyched that you came to hang out and talk with us. Each of us has a little bit different roles. I come from an IT background, and I am joined by two amazing communicators who come from the business side of it. So all of the intranet projects that I've been lucky enough to be involved in have been a really good partnership between communications and IT back and forth. So we thought it would be pretty interesting to put together a session that was really focused on why build an intranet, why build it on communication sites, on the modern SharePoint platform, and give you a couple different perspectives, because if there's one thing that I've seen is that we can come to a great conference like this, see a ton of great technology, go home and not have a way to get it off the ground, to be able to overcome friction, to get the business to say, yeah, let's go. So we'll start by just saying hi a little bit and let Nicole go first.
Hey everyone, my name is Nicole Rojas. I am at Takeda currently. Previously I was at Shire, where I was the head of digital communications, and so what that meant at Shire was I was responsible for our intranet as well as all our external digital properties, from websites to social media, and that's where I met Dave, and we started our partnership. And currently today I'm at Takeda in global internal communications, and I am the IT business partner to our Chief Digital and Information Officer. So I kind of wear both hats, and then I serve as an advisor on our global corporate intranet, as well as being responsible for taking care of the IT function that services the enterprise, but then also services our employees.
Good morning, my name is Jacque Fourchy. I'm head of Corp Comms for Granite Construction. We're about a $3 billion transportation and infrastructure company, so basically anything that you drive on, ride on, use to get here, things that get you from point A to point B, we have some involvement in or do. I even was out for a run yesterday morning and saw some of our work here on the strip, some of our trucks, like they're following me. But we work across the US and Canada and in South Americas. So I've been with Granite for 21 years, all in a communications-related function, and came upon this project. It's sort of surreal that I'm here because I was literally fangirling Dave and Sue and Nicole on YouTube over probably about 18 months ago, at least now, 2 years ago. Time's gone by fast, and just learning as much as I could about this new intranet project that I was going to be taking on, and then started, you know, kind of stalking them at SharePoint conferences, and then actually flew out to meet Dave and spend some time with him and really get a feel for what it was that I was embarking on. So it's great to be here. I will chime in as I can. Do not ask me about anything like farms or collections, because that's all really foreign, but from a communication standpoint and building a modern intranet and working closely with the business, I'm happy to contribute as much as I can to the conversation. So,
hey guys, I'm Dave. And that is what it looks like in my house early in the morning when they say, please don't take our picture, and I'm taking their pictures anyway. I really enjoyed it. So you can find me at Boston Music Dave at just about anything if you want to have further conversation after today. My background is I've been doing SharePoint since like 2007, and I've done it across consulting. I've done it for the defense industry. I've done it for 2 different biotech pharma companies all over the place, and I'm lucky enough to get to go to a bunch of conferences and speak with other smart people and get to learn a ton and talk to great customers and see how they're doing stuff. So I love all things SharePoint, all things intranet. I'm going to probably get off this slide before that looping video drives too many people crazy.
It's boomerang.
Yeah, it really is. But my responsibility at Takeda is for SharePoint, OneDrive, Yammer. I had that responsibility at Shire before we got acquired in January, and have gotten to do it all over again and start to roll out some of those same services at my new company over the last few months as well. So
Whether you like it or not.
I love it. I get to work with wonderful people. That's kind of how I view all this stuff. And you'll notice all 3 of us started with with photos of kind of, who we are, our family, our background. I worked for a great leader in IT who said, you can walk in front of a room of people, not know a single one of them, and they may or may not listen to you. If you become an actual person, if you can, kind of humanize who you are and connect to people, you've got a better chance. So all three of us are people who have had the same struggles, who are learning on this journey, and we're psyched to kind of share what we've learned with you and take it from there.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that we just want to say is we want this session to be interactive. We're probably going to jump in and add some comments on top of each other as well. So if you have questions along the way, please feel free to stop us. We want to make sure that this is valuable for you, and we're happy to kind of talk about anything that may be on your mind, or say, time out, stop, let's talk about that. So as Dave was saying, this is not my actual grandfather. He is 95, but this is a picture of a grandfather. And the reason because I didn't have a high-res enough photo of my grandfather to put on the big screen, but he always says you have to tell better stories. And really that's what the business is looking for. Everybody wants their day in the sun. They want to express themselves. They want to talk about the great things they're doing, either from a corporate level or down to the individual level. And I think really the importance of leveraging all of these tools, including the Microsoft 365 suite, is about telling those stories and getting those messages out to the broader organization, to your division, to your teams, whatever that may be. It is about creating that culture. It is about creating that fabric of identity, of really kind of connecting with people that you spend an awful lot of time with, and the company really has some key objectives that they have to meet, and that is the way that we can really move the business forward. So one of the things that we really wanted to focus on in this session as we kind of chatted among all of our various experiences, it's really driving to outcomes, right? What are we trying to do? What are we trying to achieve? Are we educating people? Are we asking them to engage with us? Because now we have that option using this full set of tools, which we'll kind of go into a little bit. Are we trying to activate them? So from a communications perspective, we really want to figure out what are we trying to achieve and use the tools to get to where we need to go. And sometimes you're on a whole continuum of, right, from an intranet perspective, you're like, I just want to put information out there. But the nice part is over time and with the out-of-the-box tools that we have available to us now, you can really move people along this engagement spectrum and get them to where you need to be to create community, to create advocacy. And I think just even thinking about this community, right, how much it's grown, how much it's changed, how you learn, that again can apply to what you're trying to achieve from a business perspective as well. So the other thing to think about, and again, from everybody, a lot of your perspectives in here, you're trying to achieve what the business is looking for. And I think from a communications perspective, Jacque and I really talked about changing the model. What we used to be able to do was just push communications to people. It just kind of sat there, nothing really happened. Maybe it was in email as well. But really the model is changing to an engagement model. And you'll see this multi-channel piece. And for me, that's the really important piece of Microsoft 365, including SharePoint, as a big piece of this, is creating that engagement, creating multiple channels that you can reach people at different times as we're moving along that continuum. I'm wanting employees to do different things as we move through different journeys, and then also getting to that specific audience piece of it as well that allows me as a communicator to do that. And that's what's important to the business most of the time, is getting to those kind of key points.
And I would say, to add to that, the key point is if you're an IT person and your comms person isn't here or isn't interested, get them, bring them to a conference. I would say, something like, maybe not Ignite to start with, because that's pretty overwhelming, but a SharePoint Fest would be good, because you need to find that partner who has the similar passion and really understands the full potential of what's available in M365.
As an IT guy, I want to add my perspective on this as well for what multi-channel communication means to me. Real-world example. I was doing a lunchtime training session on modern team sites. Basic stuff that as a SharePoint guy I probably do every couple months. And the first time we did one of these, our organizational change management person, who's great, put a note inside the shared services newsletter that said, hey, Dave Feldman is going to be doing a session on modern team sites. You should come out and learn all about SharePoint. We had 12 people show up to the webcast. Okay, it's a good start. You can have some great conversations. Next time we said, let's try something different. We sent a calendar invite to all employees. We had 1,500 people show up. So when you think about channels, right, it's not just is it on a web page, is it on Twitter, is it on Yammer, is it on all of this? It's really all the different ways that you can reach people, and depending on what the outcome is that you're trying to get, if I want to get someone to show up to a lunchtime training, I am never putting it in a newsletter again, because it obviously was not.
You will, but you'll add it other places as well.
Exactly. I just wanted to share my 2 cents of what that meant to me as a guy who gets to do these trainings.
You'll add an event into the SharePoint site so people can get there. Calendar. Yammer is always, a good thing, plus your newsletters, which you can use in modern communication sites as well. So, but it's about reaching people in different ways. People work differently.
For sure, yeah. It's amazing though. You put something on someone's calendar and they tend to show up, at least at the company, at the 2 companies I've tried it at. It's remarkable.
And if you can do it in 30 minutes, you'll have even better turnout. If you can kind of break it up into 2 30-minute chunks.
Add lunch, add swag, yeah, absolutely.
And also, again, kind of extending back to this model is, it's recording those sessions and then putting them onto stream and then resharing them. So it's making things available in multiple ways. If that time doesn't work, that you make that information accessible and use the tools at your disposal, which is really nice. Okay, so this is one of the things that we wanted to kind of talk to you about, because one of the pieces as a business owner is I have kind of a high list of demands that we tend to want from a corporate communications or communications perspective. And I think where modern communication sites and the Microsoft 365 suite really helps is we can do a lot of these things now a lot easier than before. So you can meet the demands of the business, but also create flexibility. So you kind of have this top-down piece that's coming from corporate communications, but then you kind of have this little bit more egalitarian from the bottom up of being able to contribute content and users, et cetera. But these are a lot of the things that your corporate team may, or a more senior team may be looking for. So really the branding piece, creating a shared identity, whether it's your company, whether it's your division, however your branding is laid out, it's creating that shared identity and that consistency across the platform is much easier. So like Dave Cohn and the team yesterday talked about a lot of the stuff around the lookbook and theme generator, so that you can really kind of get to that corporate branding, that divisional branding, whatever you may have, piece of it as well. So again, from a comms perspective, I like highly visual. Again, I like visual storytelling. It is about the stories. It's getting across the key messages pretty easily. The flexible framework, particularly for me as a communications person, I like to be able to mix things up in terms of how am I telling that story, whereas the classic SharePoint really limited me on what I could do in order to tell that story, whereas the modern communication sites, which we'll show you in a little bit, has that flexibility, has that framework. And then we also just talked a little bit about audience, making sure you're getting to your right audience. This allows you to do that. And then feedback piece of it is really important. So it's more of a bi-directional conversation in terms of having comments. You can put forms on pages, include Yammer web parts into your pages so that you can get this feedback mechanism. And then the last one for me is about mobility, really, right? Most of us are not sitting at our desks all day. We want to have that same experience that we have in our everyday life of living on these devices, but we want to be able to do it for our work as well. And that really, these tools enable us to do that on the go. I think one of my favorite stories was, a couple years ago when we first moved at Shire over to then Office 365, was I was on a field trip with my son, and our CIO at the time, who happens to be our CDIO now at Takeda, asked me for a document that we needed to present to the executive team, and my thought was, oh, crud, I'm surrounded by pigs right now. I don't know how I'm going to do this. And I was like, wait, I have it on my phone. And so I was really able to get that document over to him quickly. But it just kind of shows you that, you know, our work life doesn't stop even if you're not sitting in front of your laptop.
Does anyone have anything to add to that list that might be on theirs?
Go ahead.
Yeah, question about the feedback.
Sure.
Is the feedback to find out if you hit the audience, almost like metrics, or is the feedback an essential piece of an intranet that breaks down barriers? Like what do you see?
I think for me it's both, right? So I can see now on modern communication sites how many views, likes, kind of engagement on it as well. And then so that's kind of that metric side of it. But for me, it's about creating a dialogue, right? As the information that's out there been received, is it useful? Is there anything we could do better? Is there anything we got wrong on it? So it's just creating a dialogue versus it just kind of landing out there and not knowing kind of what has happened with that content. And it's about evolving, doing a better job for me. So it's actually both for me.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, sorry, I'm talking a lot here. Okay, so for here, we want to kind of adjust and think about the objectives you're trying to achieve versus just that traditional list of requirements. Finding out what the business really needs to achieve and figuring out what are the right tools to achieve it are really important. So
this is super important. So we're going to go through and talk about, for each of our different scenarios, what we were shooting for, what our objective was we were trying to hit. But especially if you are a partner or if you are working with a partner, either side of the two, if you start with requirements, they will give you exactly what you asked for. So it's really important. And Jackie will talk about that a little bit later and some of the lessons learned from that. But if you go in and you say, I must have A, B, C, D, and E, they will give you A, B, C, D, and E, and you might totally miss what you were trying to do. So if you can take a step back instead and think about what is it that we're trying to accomplish as a business, you are likely to get the right answer without having to build everything custom yourselves, because there's a great framework of tools that we can use to go solve those problems.
Yeah, and a lot of times the business wants to dive right into those requirements, as you do. But I think, to Dave's point, really stepping back and trying to get that big picture of what you're trying to achieve is really important. So I'm going to, as throughout this kind of session, I'm going to talk about the Shire pieces, and then Dave will talk about Takeda, and then Jackie's going to talk about Granite. So for us, from Shire, one of the problems that we were trying to solve was, when I took on the role, is the previous two intranets had literally just been dumped into a new classic SharePoint intranet, and you couldn't find anything. From a search perspective, from a functional organization perspective, it was a really terrible experience. And so our objective was to, again, take a step back and make it useful to folks, and that they could find things both from a navigation perspective, but then also a search perspective. So really kind of just starting with a clean slate. And then the other piece for me was, I kind of picked my head out of the sand, this was a couple of years ago, and said, I don't understand. We have all of these suite of tools in Microsoft 365. Why aren't we using them? From a communications perspective, I want to use everything at my disposal to try to get my message out there, reach employees, do what we're wanting to achieve, and you're only giving me this little narrow view and this one tool to do it. So really our vision was to create a digital workspace or place that incorporated all of these elements and pieces and really got people where they were going. So then that included navigation, the tools, educating people about this is how you can actually use these things, because to me, communication is not just about that corporate piece, it's about working with your teams as well. And we really kind of took that approach, is not just traditional communication, but it's that collaboration piece as well of what you do with your teams.
Oh, my turn. Okay, I was just making a note, I didn't want to forget a point. So I would say Nicole's objectives could be added to my list too, but we started with a really low bar. As you'll see a screenshot, our intranet was built, original intranet was built in Cold Fusion. So we literally came out of the dark ages into the light with M365. So the prior intranet really was not a credible source of information. People, you know, people would put stuff in there and then it would just die. And people would leave the company and nobody would update it. And so we had this list of frequently used documents. Who has a page like that of frequently used forms and documents? It was like this huge laundry list of stuff, and you know, they had a date next to them, and some of them were 10 years old, 15 years old. So that's what we were starting with, and then we have about 8,000 salaried employees who have Active Directory accounts, and a good majority of those don't work at a desk. So we're a construction company. We have people that, you know, they're in trucks, they're on job sites, they're on the go. And so with the Cold Fusion site you had to be tied to the network. And that was a really important requirement for us, or objective for us, was to be able to have this mobile friendly. And for our employees, going to your point, who asked about the feedback, is we had a lot of silos in Granite. We still sort of do, but we're breaking those down slowly but surely. And we just didn't have a way for people to really connect with each other and to cross-pollinate. And so having this ability, not just within our intranet, but utilizing Yammer and some of the other tools to help people collaborate. We have not deployed Teams yet within Granite. That's hopefully coming at the end of the year. We're really trying to make sure we do this strategically and methodically, so we're taking our time with Teams, but as people are really just getting their feet wet with Yammer right now. So we're excited about that, just the ability to like a page and comment and give feedback on a news post. It was a big change for us. So that was a big objective that we were able to achieve. And then the last one here really helped me sell this project to our executive committee and get the funding for it, because as I've told people, it's like I had to tell them, hey, do you guys know that when we started our project, we had not yet officially rolled out O365 and 365 to our organization. We had done the email migration, so people are using Outlook, but unless they discovered, right, that they had access to this, there was no communication around it, and even I really didn't know what status we were in. So I explained to our executive committee and our board, do you guys know you basically have a Ferrari in the garage that's covered up? And then when we decided to build the intranet using Modern, it was like, okay, so I'm gonna now be hooking this project up to this Ferrari that nobody knows exists and knows how to drive. So we ran into some interesting challenges, but we did it, and we were able to show, hey, we're already paying for this. Let's use this, and let's do this. So it was a parallel project and sort of a rollout of O365, M365, and rollout of our intranet as well. And the point to make that I was wanting to make sure I didn't forget and wrote down was on the requirement side, this project was originally driven by IT, like an IT project with requirements. And I remember just fretting over filling out this form that they had sent to me, right, this document, and asking all these requirements, and it just was, I initially felt like I was trying to stuff a round peg into a square hole from the get-go, and in hindsight, and lessons learned, right, is an intranet project, especially one in Modern, cannot be run like that. It just can't, and we lost a lot of time and a lot of resources in going through that whole process and then having to back up and start over with objectives. And the other point I was going to make too was on the objectives. I would add too, because I'm living it today, as we're about 8 months post go live, is having an objective to continue to support. As I said to Dave, it's sort of like your house, you don't always have it in the good shape, right, for you to be able to list it for sale, but you need to continue to walk through it and see, and oh, this needs to be touched up, this needs to be done, and you need dedicated resources to be able to do that. Otherwise, it's like you're going to have to go through this whole process, you know, more often than you'd like. So having that ongoing support, not just IT support, but just eyes and ears that are coming to these conferences, paying attention to what's changing, what's rolling out, what's to come, updating the information. It's a lot more work than I appreciated when we were pulling this together. So post go live now, I'm trying to figure out how do I allocate those resources that I need to keep this project really giving it the attention that it deserves on an ongoing basis.
So I started working with.
Oh, he has a question.
Oh,
Yep.
question.
Yeah, so if the requirements was filled out form, can you characterize what the objective sessions were like?
The objective sessions came out of, I would say, after our discovery meetings with the business. Then it was like, okay, wait a second, our notes from these discovery meetings aren't necessarily lining up with these requirements, right? So we put the cart before the horse in a lot of ways. So going through the discovery meetings, figuring out what the business really needed, what was most important to them, and then creating objectives from there. So, yeah.
And one of the big things we had originally done at Shire is we kind of got the business and IT technology together in a room and created a visioning session. So like, what is our shared vision for where we want to go? And that was really our touchstone. And then we figured out what were our objectives after that. But we had to have kind of that North Star. Where are we trying to get to? Where are we trying to move the business to from a vision perspective? And we brought everybody into that same room and created that shared sense of it, because if you're not you don't always have to agree, as Steve and I don't always agree, but you have to have a shared vision of where you're wanting to go so you can have that respectful debate about X, Y, or Z as you're moving along the way.
And was that section like an open-ended question? Like, okay, we have 2 hours, what's your vision?
Yeah, we had structured session.
Yeah, we had about
talking
3 days total that we actually spent in a room, and it was interesting because no one knew what their job was yet. We had 2 companies being combined together, so you had at least 2 in a box, sometimes 3 in a box for each of the different roles, so you didn't know who was in charge. So there was a tremendous amount of kind of back and forth expression of ideas, but a lot of openness to other people's ideas, because you might be working for that person tomorrow, so you had to be very respectful in doing it.
It wasn't like the Hunger Games.
It was not the Hunger Games, yeah.
So who were in those meetings?
So at the time, it was myself from a communications perspective. We had the owner of the collaboration platform in there, Dave as a solutions architect. We had our OCM folks in there, and then I think we had an architecture.
Well, there were 2 intranet owners on the 2 different companies.
Correct,
that was both part of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Security folks were in the room. There was legal and compliance. They had perspectives. There was HR for a couple hours. So an overall kind of, multi-day workshop.
That's awesome that you had OCM in there.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
From the very start.
Yeah.
Yes.
So after supporting Nicole at Shire, we finished up that project on September 31st of last year, migrated everything off of on-prem, everything out of the second tenant, landed everything in one environment. It was all set, beautiful thing. That was the 31st. We went out to celebrate, took the whole team out. We, celebrated, had a couple drinks, threw axes. Everyone survived, so everyone is stayed with us at the end of that. And then the next day, we actually started working on, toward day 1 for Takeda. So they had already announced that Shire was going to be acquired. We knew that was happening, so we finished the first project, went straight into planning for the second project. Part of the switch there was that they had a heavily customized intranet that had been built by a partner several years ago, and then handed off to another outsourced partner, and then handed off to another outsourced partner, and then handed off to another outsourced partner, as it was about to be handed off to yet another outsourced partner. And there were all sorts of reliability issues with it. There were things that were challenging that would break, or performance issues, or things like that that had to be addressed before doubling the size of the company. Wanted to make sure that everything was going to work, that it was going to be supportable, sustainable, high performance, and help build the right culture as you're bringing 2 companies together to align, 30,000 new people and get them to be part of that shared vision and that shared company. So a couple of the things that were interesting about My Takeda, which was the name of their intranet, that were kind of unique, I guess, was that for each person you had a profile, including what function you're part of. I'm part of IT or finance or HR or comms, where you sit, you know, what region, what country, what specific office location. And based on that profile, they delivered to you custom news, custom, you know, resources and links that might be useful for you, but there was a heavy kind of focus on personalization and driving content toward you. The other one that I think was an interesting requirement was that they offered the intranet in 8 different languages, which there was a good session on multilingual yesterday that's now becoming part of communication sites and part of the SharePoint platform. They're working on that right now. But last year they weren't, so we had to find a good way to be able to go solve that problem as well, while addressing all of the performance and reliability issues inside there. So that was kind of our big focus as we started forward.
Perfect. So for Shire, this was the hub. So you'll see kind of the classic version over here. And I think, you know, the main point of this story from a communications perspective, it was driven by one person. On the corporate communications team, he posted everything you see on this page. What if Eric got run over by a bus? Then what would the rest of us do?
Won the lottery, yes.
Won the lottery.
Yes.
Whichever it may have been. And so that really created an issue for us. And going over to modern SharePoint really allowed us to, you'll see in this upper, do you have the pointer real quick? So this upper region here now, from a news perspective, and then just this little bit here of, you know, kind of leftover news, as I like to call it. But your main news pieces were continued to be driven by corporate communications, which is more than just Eric. So more people can contribute to it because it was easy, it was scalable, we got them trained. Again, it was fairly easy to do that, which is really nice because it's very intuitive how to post. And then the rest of the content is really driven by the rest of the organization. And, you know, for me, getting to that kind of personalization piece of, right, in modern, you follow sites and then you get that personalized news delivered to you as well. So we had less reliance on one individual, better reflected the organization and the news that was coming in throughout it as well, but also kind of allowed us to highlight some of the key content and break away from a dependence perspective.
Okay, so moving to Granite. We had, like I said, Cold Fusion was our before state, and then that page went on and on and on and on, and you could go in there and never find your way out. So it was a hot potato in IT. Taking on the intranet project was something I'd always wanted to do, and so I got to the point where I got the funding for it and got the support, kind of cleared the decks on my calendar for the next 12 to 18 months, and off we went. One of the things in hindsight that I'm most proud of is the relationship that I built with our IT team at the beginning of this, and I think that's in part because I did have this desire to learn about what this was that we were going to build. And so for them, and this is probably for you guys too, if you're on the IT side, is having somebody on the comms team that appreciates what you do and the amount of work that goes into it is a nice place to start, right? And so that was where our project started, was really me partnering up with our IT people and having, you know, they'd get texts from me all the time like, okay, what is this? And what, you know, help me define this. And they thank goodness, appreciated that and really helped me get up to speed as fast as I could. It was a steep learning curve, and I spent, like I said, tons of time on YouTube. I mean, I was binging YouTube SharePoint videos like my daughter binges Friends on Netflix. So we went to, then today is our modern site. This is about as it looked when we went live back in September, and it's all out of the box. We decided to do out of the box sort of at the last minute, which is an interesting part of our story, is literally 2 weeks before we went live, we had a classic site, homepage, landing page built in Classic that I discovered was not going to be viewable on the SharePoint mobile app. So literally a week prior to our test launch, I rebuilt our homepage in Modern. So when we asked the question, why Modern, why communication site? Because it's easy. Like we had basically everything else in the house built. Now I just needed to take and pull everything to the front and decide, you know, what should go where. So that was an interesting lesson learned on that. But I would say there's so much more knowledge, and why I went out to see Dave in the first place was because I wanted to kick the tires. With intranets, websites, it's one thing, you can go and look at all these company sites and, and poke around, but intranets, it's so different. And I really needed to get in and see, how do you navigate in this modern intranet, right? How does the app work? And so I went from California to Boston and met with these two and was able to catch Sue Hanley too, was there one morning and had breakfast. And so it was just a great, it was a trifecta meeting for me.
Well, and it's just also getting in there and doing a little bit of yourself, right? Like we kind of went through and showed you how to, how easy it was to drag and drop web parts, what to do, that flexibility in that framework that we kind of talked about earlier, because I mean, that's insane that you can create a new homepage.
Below, what you can't see below that screenshot on our current intranet is we have video highlights using the stream web part, and then we have the feedback, so you don't have to go too far down if you want to provide feedback or you need help or you need to reach our compliance line. And then at the bottom of that, we've added the Yammer web part, our Twitter feed, and we have our trending documents. So if people kind of want to scroll down further, they're going to get more. And so we're still playing with, how far down do we want for people to go. But like I said, we're still introducing Yammer to the organization, and we've made some acquisitions of late. So I think it's good for people to see what our voice is on social, that people are actually using Yammer, because we do have still a lot of people who are like, oh, Yammer, it's just one more thing to check, or I don't get it, so I'm not going to go there. But they're actually seeing, if they go down there, they're actually going to see there is some really good conversations that are taking place in Yammer. So. Oh, on the tiles. So that was a big requirement for, I keep saying that, sorry. It was a big objective for our team, was to be able to provide the applications that people use, right, every day. Like, it's to our E1 system, it's to time cards, it's to, all of those things. And we had people rank, what were their top 9, what were their top ones. We then added a 9th tile and then it expands to a different page where we have more applications that you can access. So that's probably one of our most popular and highly accessed web parts, and that we just created, or used. No, unfortunately, we do not have single sign-on for a lot of our applications. That's. What we tried to do, and I get it, because that was something I was asking the same questions from an experience standpoint, and then I learned quickly that it was a way bigger project than I even appreciated. And what we just tried to do was make sure people knew that they were going to have to do it, right? So if you expect to have to go in and get another login, just make sure that that's known ahead of time, so that it helps reduce the frustration. It doesn't solve all those issues, but so that's why we have in the parens, VPN required, or that sort of thing. So.
Yeah.
And then I don't have other pages, but what we try to do as well, because we still do have an on-premise, we have a hybrid environment today, so we do still have a repository of a lot of documents that are on-premise. So we created custom icons, which is, I think, something that we're going to probably get away from and do something that's more, that's easier for the site managers to utilize, because right now they have to go into site assets, a little bit more clicks than I would like, but the icon is a lock icon, and so using that anytime somebody they know that if they're going to have that, they are probably not going to get into it seamlessly, especially on mobile. So just trying to do as much of that as possible, because we couldn't fix the single sign-on issue as part of this project. Okay. So this is a slide. So Dave, one of the things that I reached out to Dave in my last minute panic on our site, because it's sort of like when you go to the doctor and you go to a generalist and they give you a diagnosis and you're like, whoa, okay. So I know you're a doctor and you're really smart, but it just doesn't seem right? It's like this, I feel like my gut's telling me something different. And so this was developed because my gut was telling me something different than what our vendor partners and some of our internal partners were telling me, and I needed to trust and verify the information. And so I put together this pro and cons and had it vetted by our team, and everybody sort of kind of weighed in, because at the time we were building out our site, it was still very new. I mean, when you did Shire, it was very new. And then when we came on, sort of on the heels, it was still pretty new. So there was a lot of knowledge being developed within the community still. And so it wasn't that I didn't trust our partner, it was really just I had questions that I wasn't getting the right answers on. And so this was something I sent to Dave, and he...
I got a great blog post out of it. It was fantastic. But we wanted to show you some of these techniques, because as we kind of tell the story and as we walk through them, it's not always an immediate, for sure, let's go deploy a brand new intranet and let's go do this on top of communication sites. So again, you see sort of the before and after of the two. And the couple things I wanted to highlight on here was this top section is corporate news. And one downside of a slider is that no one ever sees beyond that first article. That's the only one that ever gets seen. So we made an intentional decision not to use a slider, even though they're very pretty looking. On the right-hand side, that is ad space, because there are a lot of people who want to advertise some short-term thing and need a way to put it at the top of the homepage. So those are that actually is a slider, but they auto-rotate. And therefore, after 5 seconds, it goes to the next one. Just a way to be able to do that. On the old one, they had a little section over here from My News that brought the most recent 5 articles from your targeted news. Then they had a section called Announcements. And the first question that I asked was, what's the difference between news and announcements?
And no one could answer.
Not a single person could answer what the difference between news and announcements were. So all right, so now there's just news. We'll simplify, because very often you would have the same article posted to the 2 different sections. So ask questions like that. As you're looking at your existing intranet, as you're looking at plans that you're making for the new one, is it easy for people to understand what something is? That's really, really key. So on the modern side, this whole thing right here is the only customization on the homepage. So we have one web part called My News, and that My News takes a combination of classic news, because you can't convert the entire intranet in one day, and there were a couple hundred different publishers of news, so we're going one at a time, storming the islands. But until then, we were able to aggregate modern news coming from the SharePoint Home News Service with all of the classic news that came out of SharePoint Search. So our one customization on here is this guy, which is just sort of to get us through that bridge period. The rest of the page is entirely out of the box. So you'll see things like this background section over here just has 4 different copies of quick links to be able to create a nice custom experience inside there, but all out of the box web parts when you go look at that.
And then I think the only other thing about news is, right, the idea is, we had to create this interim solution based on, the acquisition of a new organization. So we limited what we needed to do from a customized perspective, but the idea is that we'll go out of the box over time. And so, for example, for IT, what I recently did is launched our function site using Modern. And essentially what I decided to do, because I didn't want to have all the classic news feeding in, I wanted to use the out-of-the-box feature, is, I kind of gathered the trusted communicators, did a quick training with them, gave them access to publish on my site from a global IT perspective, knowing over time as they develop their individual communication sites, then I will then pull news in from their location. So I think there's just a couple of different strategies that you can take to meet your same outcomes, and sometimes, you do something in transition until you can kind of get to that future state, but it allows you flexibility to meet those objectives that you're trying to achieve.
Question, so
Yep.
once you got from classic to modern, you had something there,
Yeah.
pilot, how did you guys get the organization itself behind it? Did you get focus groups, any changes?
I'm going to talk a lot about that over the next couple of slides.
And then-
Yeah, that's a great question. In back, sorry.
Can I ask you a quick question about your newsletter?
Sure.
One of the things that we keep talking about is we deliver this electronic newsletter, right?
Yep.
People via email, those posted on our internet now, is to try and sort of break that apart, right? So that you're getting more timely information in like a news feed on the internet.
Yes.
So are you aggregating what's on your news site and putting that into some sort of single
Newsletter, yeah.
application that you're then distributing, and how do you
Correct.
how do you distribute that newsletter?
Sure. So we do, again, we kind of multi-step it in a different way. So we generally use, part of the training is, again, asking people to follow the site so then they can get news on both the home page, SharePoint home, which we're also teaching people about, teaching them to fish, as well as on their mobile, right? So those are kind of the three ways when we post content, that's how we're doing it. And from a newsletter perspective, I currently use, I just use Outlook email and then aggregate them into that. But what I've started playing with is, because currently for IT, our newsletter only goes out once a month, and I find it's like this big, and I'm like, oh, that doesn't feel very good. So what I'm starting to play with is actually use the feature in modern communication sites. There's like create a news bulletin, and you basically click, click, click. But one of our challenges is kind of groups and distribution, et cetera, just because we're coming together as a new organization. So I'm starting to play with that as well, because then, one, it lays it out really beautifully, and then I can just click and highlight the ones that I think are most important, and it's little snippets versus a whole kind of newsletter. But right now, it's very traditional Outlook. But again, to the session, I think the keynote session where Kevin kind of got up there is, we always link back to our communications sites. Like, it's general content there. Again, from an events perspective, we link them back to the events page where they can download it, and to Outlook themselves, they can get more information, kind of, et cetera. So again, we're trying to hit them multiple ways because people work in different,
The other thing I've seen a lot of people do that's pretty effective is they'll create a news digest, send it to themselves, and then post-process it a little bit.
Yeah,
hey, this is 90% of what I want. I'm going to send it to myself, tweak the branding at the top, go put the IT newsletter logo at the top, or the Canada newsletter logo at the top, and then send it out to their distribution list after they've had a chance to massage it a little bit.
But ideally, I'd like it, right, again, this is kind of that partnership evolution, working with the Microsoft teams to say, like, this is a little bit of the more flexibility I'd like to see, because anything that can reduce the amount of steps, allow us to do slight little bits of, customization. But from, the News Digest perspective, you can put a nice, like, quick little note on the top of it. It pulls in the branding from the site you're sending it from. And you'll see later, for our site, we have a hub site. So you can kind of pull some of those elements in as well.
And really quickly, we use a News Digest. We use the summary news. So we publish everything in news. We really try to push everybody to publish in the news. And then we do a monthly, and I can show you after this if you'd like, is we do what Dave says, is we send it to ourselves, we add our custom header, we add a custom footer, and then it goes out. And what we try to do is sort of, like, we can't list all the stories, which is a good problem that we're now having, is there's a lot. So people are using it. But it's like reminding people, hey, if you missed this earlier in the month, you need to go and keep checking, right, the site. And so it's a change management, behavior changes. We did move your cheese because we're not feeding this to you all the time and spamming you with email as much. But it's there if you want it, but we'll still summarize it for you. I mean, my dream as a communicator was to, like, not do this newsletter, but it's being efficient doesn't always mean effective, right? So I think you still have to, like Nicole said, hit them different ways, and it may be less efficient, but it's more effective.
So I also have a question about one person mentioned that their key objective was search did not work on the Intranet.
Yeah.
Search did help, search did get fixed using the new Intranet. What was the main concept, or how did you guys get search to work?
We didn't have search on our cold
fusion
site, so
that was my objective. He solved it for me.
So a couple different things. So one of them was a switch from classic search over to modern search, which is now based on you. So it's using the graph to understand who you are, what you relate to. The search results just themselves are actually better on the modern search page than they were on the classic search. In addition, with Microsoft Search, there's a couple new capabilities that for us are really key. One of them is bookmarks, so the ability to go through and define kind of your promoted key sites. So we went through and grabbed a bunch of those for all of our key tools and promoted those. We went through results and saw that's a lot of what people were searching for, and they weren't finding it because it doesn't live in SharePoint. If I search SharePoint for Workday, I'm going to go find the PowerPoint from the team that was rolling out Workday. I'm not going to find Workday. So as an example, things like that are really powerful. Also locations, going through and defining each of your key locations. So when people start to search for those, so really just more curation, as well as the better search engine inside modern SharePoint search and Microsoft search. So kind of talking through our mission, and I'm giving you a little bit of behind the scenes on this as well. So consistent user experience, key company news in all of our supported languages, make sure that we had the flexibility to support all the types of content that people were going to need to deliver to 30,000 new employees, 30,000 old employees, put it all together and then make it work on every single one of these devices. So that could mean legacy Takeda mobile devices, legacy Shire mobile devices, which weren't all the same, different browsers, different platforms, different Citrix VDIs, different kiosks and manufacturing sites. So all of these different things had to make sure that that was going to work. And people were not all signed up for saying, hey, we should go roll out a brand new intranet 2 months before this happens. We don't have a lot of time. And if I look at some of the main focus areas, and I tried to bold them because I know that the room's pretty big, we were starting in October, right? So how are we going to train people if we can't start training them until December and everyone's going on vacation? How do we assess the change impact? What about the time to go build the homepage? Are we going to get there in time? Time to test and train. What's the experience between the old and the new? How do we marry those together? Again, more about the communications campaign. What about tutorials? What do we do for first-time users? Do we have time for focus groups? How do we get all of those things to occur inside a 2-month window? So that was a lot of the concern and the pushback that I heard from my communications and even from within IT, other partners pushing back and saying, can we really do this? And we actually went through and we said, just sharing how we did this analysis, right? So we looked at what are the benefits for us if we stay classic? What are the benefits if we go modern? And went through and color-coded them to make them really easy to be able to go see. We could stay where we are and there's less risk of not changing something 2 months before a giant thing occurs and doing something totally unknown. But we know it has a bunch of problems. How do we make that decision back and forth? So we put together a chart like that, and we summarized down a list of factors to think about. When thinking about, do we stay classic, do we go modern? And it really came down to scale, performance, supportability. Can it support our requirements after this big event? So am I going to be starting over 2 months from now and have to do this all over again? Can I support all the devices? What's it going to be like for users who are used to the old classic one? What's it going to be like for users who are coming from Shire, who had a modern communication sites-based intranet? Like putting all of these different kind of perspectives together. What's it going to be like for people who have to write the content, who are trained on doing it right now and now have to learn something new? So thinking about all of these different factors in making the decision. And then we actually went together, and this is for real, like the slide that came out of the deck of how we went through and scored all these. And what you will see, I wanted to make it easier to see from the back of the room by just kind of pulling in a little bit of green. The things that Classic won on was just change is hard, that if I'm changing something and I already know how to do it, it's easier to not have to learn something new. I already know how to do it the old way. If I cannot change, that would be lovely. But even with that factored in, it's almost double the score to switch out of the classic intranet and get to something where we weren't accountable for all of the risk, where we were using a platform that's built by Microsoft. We leveraged a couple patterns and practices, SharePoint P&P components from the community. But again, it's not us owning all the risk and all the code and all of the, if a problem happens, we're on our own on an island. Instead, it's leveraging something with a support model behind it. So that was the direction.
And I think the other piece is, right, back to the grid, is it's not making a decision based on not wanting to change, right? That's not the right thing to do for the business. The right thing to do for the business is to move it forward and look at all of those other factors, whereas, I think one of the struggles that the team had was, a fairly more traditional organization that was opposed to change and really felt like, oh no, like what's going to happen? But that's ultimately, when you lay this out, that's not how you should be making your decisions, and using these tools and being able to roll over and say, we can make this easier for you, and use kind of out of the box features and minimize that disruption as much as possible.
So some of the things that kind of brought this together for us, at the end we wanted to pull back.
Yeah, so I know in the interest of time, we'll try to get through some of these quickly, but quick and easy to get started. Obviously, if you guys have worked in these sites, you know how simple it is. And when we started over a year ago, I explained to people it's like we had that 12 box of crayons and with web parts, and we so wanted more, and our team was really resistant to do any custom web parts or do anything outside of those 16. And then slowly, we'd get one more, like, oh my gosh, they just rolled out a new web part. And so it's great. We're taking advantage of those things. The other thing I would say too is that we have so little dependence on our IT team. Most of the help desk tickets for our intranet come to my team. And so if there's anything related to permissions, we still handle those. If it's anything related to posting information or they need training, I mean, majority of them are handled by Corp Comms. So that shows you just how easy. If we can do it, then anybody can do it.
And the bottom part of that slide, independence from communications, is also really important to me as the IT guy, right? So we roll out a lot of services. Our Office 365 help site that we have, every time there's a new service that lights up, putting the right content out there, I don't want to have to go through comms. We've had, 300 comm sites created since January. We've had 2,000 modern team sites created since January. Like, the pace of that business, if I had to thread all of that through Eric, poor Eric would be in a lot of trouble. That would be really tough, right? So being able to operate in an environment where comms can set some guidelines and some general process and some theme, and here's the general layout rules, and create a site design to reflect some of that stuff, but make it easy for anyone in the business to be effective, super powerful.
Templates are, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And finally, about just reducing risk. We talked about, is it just your code that you own inside some customized thing that you've either built or bought, or is it something that's a supported, stable platform where that risk is shared by everyone, and Microsoft is standing behind and supporting all that? So that was another big thing for us. So some planning tips and tricks, and we've got a couple to fly through. So for folks who have not seen the SharePoint lookbook, aka.ms/SP Design Guidance. It is awesome, and it will give you lots of ideas to get inspired for all different types of things. Everything from team sites, divisional portals, home sites, different combinations of look and feels, but also what are the web parts and sections behind it? How do you recreate that yourself? Mm-hmm. That's a really, really big thing. Planning. Starting with understanding your current state. And I think you heard a little bit about that from all of us up here. The workshops that we had to understand what was working, what wasn't working, what are the gaps to be able to do it, and then go through and rank those outcomes and say, these are the things that we want to make sure we don't miss on when we're designing our intranet. And then finally, the last section of it was kind of defining the zones. What are the parts of that? And I'll show you what that looked like for us. So this was our homepage, and literally we started just by drawing out different sections in boxes, whether it's on a whiteboard or on a PowerPoint. For us, our global nav was going to be at the top. Then you can see our corporate news and featured promotions, big sort of My News section over here, and then we have all of these frequently needed links and tools, similar to the tools that you have at the very top of yours. We created this kind of zone around engagement for, the, Yammer all company, and then some featured Yammer groups over here. And then this was like a corporate info zone with popular videos and press releases and corporate events. And then all the way down at the bottom, we have all of the me stuff. And that was a really interesting conversation with my comms business partner on this, where she said, everyone wants access to the stuff that they need. If you put all the personal stuff at the bottom, then they'll scroll through all my stuff. Okay, that's cool. So it works out though, but if you start at this, it's super flexible to move things around, get feedback before you start pouring any concrete.
Yeah, and I think really here, some of our things is stay focused on what you're trying to achieve, and it's not going to be perfect. So I think often the deliverable that maybe the business is looking for is, a present with the bow on top, and here you go, and then it doesn't change, nothing is ever happening. But that's not real world, right? It's not evolving and changing to meet the needs of the business, to match kind of what is happening in your everyday life in your business world as well. So they're not going to be perfect, and I think part of it is setting the expectations among the business that it's not going to be perfect, but we can change and evolve over over time. So it gets you mostly there, because if you kind of do it with a bow, there's some downsides that are going to come with that, kind of as well.
And that was part of my pitch with every presentation I gave on this project was this is not going to be a perfectly wrapped present that will go when we go live day one. And we started with about a quarter of the communication sites ready to go live. And we made that decision so that people could see them and touch them and use them. And then the business units that were a little slower to get us their content and to work with could then see, and it created a little bit of pressure on them to get their communication sites up and ready and to the point where we could go live. So we did a rolling go live on all of our communication sites. So that's one idea too for you. You don't have to have it perfectly baked.
And the last thing I think that we'll leave you with is there are a tremendous number of people here to talk to and connect to, and it doesn't just mean the speakers, it means each other. Build a network of folks, both inside your company, that could be the project team, people from comms, from IT, your project manager, your business analysts, your developers if you're building something custom, but also develop a champions network. Use Yammer to go off and find people within your company, find each other, turn and talk to the person who's sitting next to you and strike up a conversation about what they're doing, what they got out of a given session. But the more people who you can meet and interact with, that is literally how Jackie and I met. Was she walked up after a session that I did at Ignite 2 years ago, and you will find that people are eager to connect and help you. So you're not in this alone. Feel free to reach out to us or to each other, and I think all of us have had fantastic experiences building on top of communication sites. So if it's an area where you're wavering back and forth between staying inside something custom versus moving to the modern side, it's not that scary. It is pretty easy. You can always break glass and redo your homepage the week before launch if you have to. But we're here to help, and if you have any questions, come and see us.